When we're on the learning path, there are three unhelpful patterns of behavior that we often fall into. You can think of these three profiles or archetypes as being the less than perfect learner, and they're the types of learners that most people are. Knowing about these will help you avoid them and point you in the direction of true mastery, and which is really what you need to get really good. In the next video, we're going to talk about the 5 keys to mastery, which is basically the 5 keys to being an amazing learner. The 3 profiles we're going to cover, the 3 characters, you can think of these as like characters, are the Dabbler, the Hack, and the Obsessive. So what's the Dabbler about? Let's talk about the Dabbler. The Dabbler is hypnotized by the new and flummoxed by the familiar. So you might wonder what I'm talking about here, but let's see if you can think of an example of a Dabbler in your own life, and you'll see what the Dabbler is. See if you can think of a friend, or even yourself, a friend who's constantly dipping into new things. They're always like out getting the new equipment. They're always getting excited to start the new journey, like learn a new language, learn a new instrument, starting this new hobby, whatever it is. And then a few months later, they give up that new pursuit and they start it again. So they go out, they get new equipment, and they get all excited. They start telling everyone. They're like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing this time. And the pattern just keeps repeating. That friend of yours is a dabbler. That's what the dabbler is. So the things that characterize the dabbler are that there's this huge, enormous enthusiasm at the outset. So they love like the newness. They love the newness of the pursuit or the project or the discipline. They get the new equipment, the best equipment they can find. They love like the new jargon and terminology that they need to use. Everything has like this glow of novelty, and that's what starting out feels like. There is a glow of novelty, but they're obsessed with it. What happens is they get to a plateau on the learning journey, and they have this moment of crisis, and they think, man, maybe this wasn't right for me after all. Like maybe all the dreams I had weren't really going to come true. And so they abandon it after the first plateau. They don't even get past the first plateau. Until they reach that point, until they get to that plateau, they do make a little bit of progress. And the progress, they tend to like advertise it to other people. So they tell their family and their friends, and they show people what they've been learning and so on. And they just, as soon as they hit that plateau, they start missing lessons, they start making excuses, they start resisting the hard work and the dedication, and then they move on to something else, and they're convinced that this next one is the right one for them. Like they will find their partner or their Prince Charming, as it were. I think this is a huge danger for all of us nowadays. So don't think of the dabbler as being someone outside of you. There is part of you that is a dabbler, and it's not a bad thing necessarily. It can take you on, it can actually make you find something you're extremely passionate about, but it's a huge danger nowadays, because really we can do almost any hobby we want. Like, you can learn any instrument you want online, and you probably won't have to spend too much money doing it. You can learn any language on the internet if you give enough time and dedication to it. We're constantly bombarded with newness, with new products, with new clothes, with new technology and so on. It's all new, and this activates like the dabbler in us. What happens is, and we've talked about this when we've got to the importance of learning, when we talked about the importance of learning, is that if you're dabbling all the time, you never actually commit to anything for long enough to get good at it and to develop lasting skills and to reach a certain point on the mastery journey. And that's what you really want. But the glow of novelty is very appealing, and it's very distracting. What's the solution to avoiding the dabbler and just taming the dabbler within us? It's to realize that this glow of novelty is very temporary. And you'll notice, like, you start off on a new pursuit, the first few months it all feels rosy and nice, and then you realise that it's gonna you sort of have this moment of crisis, and the novelty wears off because you've been at it now for a few months. You have to forget about the glow of novelty and realise that it's actually not as shiny and nice as it seems. It doesn't bring lasting rewards. Mastery is what brings lasting rewards. So you have to develop a taste for the plateaus. When you reach that first plateau, the beginner's hump, you might say, you have to realise that it's just a plateau and that you will improve. It's not a sign that you're not cut out for it. And if you moved on to something else, the glow of novelty will just wear off again and you'll hit that first plateau. So be willing to roll up your sleeves and fight for true competency, not for just a walk in the park that always feels nice. Because as we've spoken about, learning is just not like that. Great, we've spoken about the Dabbler. Let's look at the Obsessive. So, do you know anyone that they find a new pursuit and they just go completely over the top? Like, they pour their life into it. They turn night into day. They start missing sleep. They stop socializing, and it's just like, I want to get good at this. I want to get good at this. I want to get good at this. I'm going to put so much time into it. They just never let it go. It's like it consumes their entire life. And then all of a sudden, after not too long doing that, the whole thing just falls apart. Like it collapses. That's the obsessive. That's the obsessive character. So what's going on with the obsessive? Well, the obsessive is hyper sensitive about results, hyper focused on results. Winning is all that matters. They want to do everything perfectly from day one. They can't accept the plateau, and when they get to a plateau, they think that putting more hours in is a solution, which is in some ways true, but you're not going to avoid a plateau anyway. So they just keep adding more hours, and they hate the plateau because all they want to see is results. So they take twice the number of lessons, they start practicing all day long, every moment they can find. And inevitably, because the plateau is just inevitable, it doesn't matter how many hours you put in, you're going to experience plateaus. They end up crumbling under their own weight, under their own enthusiasm, because it's just practicing that long, they end up getting an injury, or they have like some sort of breakdown, or whatever, the whole thing just comes crashing to the ground. I actually thought about this before I was going to record this video, and it made me quite sad that George Leonard, he was the guy that came up with these 3 avatars, that he thought it was necessary to actually make this its own avatar, because I don't think it's that common, but it obviously is. And yeah, it's just as damaging as the Dabbler is. The solution to the obsessive is to channel all that desire and all that energy into a long-term project, because when you actually channel it over months and years, that's when it works. When you try and get something done in a month, probably isn't going to happen, especially when you're trying to learn and you're going through plateaus. It's just not a wise way to go about it. Another solution is just to realize that results aren't always what they appear. So when we get started in a certain learning journey, we often get over focused on the results. And it takes a while to realize that the results are actually quite meaningless in a way. They're inevitable. They'll come, and you have to trust that they'll come, and it's great when they do. But the next day you wake up and it's done. Like, that part of the journey is done, and you're left with just the journey itself. So, and also that results are pretty meaningless unless there's a solid base underneath them. So if you just, I don't know, if you're a pretty average student, but you revise you stay up for 2 days straight before an exam, piling in all this knowledge, revising all the past papers, trying to like cram in all this knowledge, trying to guess the questions in the paper and so on, you might get a result. You might actually do well in the exam, but your knowledge of the subject will be terrible, and it's very overrated. And what the best results are those that are actually built on something lasting, and there's actually something underneath them. They're not just flimsy surface level results. And I think the obsessive can get trapped in their need for these results, and often they're not very stable. Great, let's go into the hacker. And the hacker, this is another one that most people are going to resonate with. So the hacker is forever on a plateau. So what does this mean? Well, the hacker actually does a bit better than the dabbler and the obsessive does. They go through several plateaus on the journey. They develop lasting competence, unlike the previous avatars. They stay in that field, they stay loyal to it, that pursuit, that hobby, that skill. But at some point, they just reach a certain level and they kind of think to themselves, well, I'm pretty good at this. Like I'm not amazing at it, but I'm good. You know, I'm at a certain level, I have a certain level of competence. So what they do is they stop doing deliberate practice. They stop trying to improve themselves, and they just go out into the world with their skills. They focus on enjoying what they already know how to do rather than trying to learn new things. And they often skip essential components on the journey because to them it doesn't matter, because they've already they're happy with what they know already. I'd be surprised if you couldn't resonate with this, because it's extremely common. And even in a basic level, if you think about driving, if you can drive a car, most drivers are like this. Like, we are hackers in driving. We pass our driving test, and then after that we never seek to improve. We never do any lessons, we never read any books about driving. And you might think, well, why? Well, I'm not going to answer that question for you, but in any case, it's hacker behavior. And driving's a fairly innocent example, but when we think of our profession, when we think of our favorite hobbies, maybe we're selling ourselves very short by being hackers. Maybe we've done 2,000 hours of deliberate practice, but if we doubled it, wow, that could have a huge impact. The key insight here is that you can't advance without deliberate practice. So it doesn't matter how many years go by. If you're just doing the same old things over and over again, you're not going to get anywhere. It doesn't matter if you do the thing for 30 years. If you aren't trying to improve your skills, you're not going to get anywhere. In fact, you might actually get worse. Like, think of a high school teacher who doesn't like their job, who's been teaching the same maths or whatever it is for 30 years, using the same old methods. 30 years ago, those methods might have worked, but now you're dealing with a new generation. You're in an age with new technology, and you're just ignoring that. So you've become worse relative to like the other teachers out there. And that's the danger with the hacker. Like, you might think you're better than you are and just stop and think you don't need any more, when really that is not the case, and you're selling yourself very short. So that's the dabbler, the obsessive, and the hacker. These categories, they're simplifications, right? They're categories, and they're not so neat and rigid in reality. Like, you can be a dabbler in your hobbies, and you can be a master in your career, or any combination of those. What you'll see though is there tends to be an underlying pattern. Even if you've got some tendencies that don't line up with your main character, most of the time you're operating from one of these. And we're going to talk about master in a minute. The lesson here is that you're going to be tempted to follow any one of these paths on the learning journey. Like, at the beginner's hump, you're going to want to dabble. You're going to want to be an obsessive. And after a certain number of plateaus, when you've already got used to it and there's things that are second nature to you, you might even be in unconscious competence at this point, you're going to be tempted to just stop. But again, it just depends on your goals. If you really want to reach extraordinary levels, you have to avoid these three characters, because these characters just stop you. They stop you from improving. And this is a tendency of most people. You will be tempted on the journey, but again, you have to avoid them if you want to get extremely good. Now, in the workbook, we're going to look at some more exercises to identify these avatars or characters operating in yourself. Just know for now that if you want to avoid these, you've got to follow the 5 master keys to be a real master, to be the ideal learner. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next video.